The first day at our new lakefront cabin should have been nothing but peace. The moving truck had just rumbled away, leaving behind the scent of fresh wood and dust, and my wife and I were finally beginning to breathe in the calm air of our new home. The lake stretched out in front of us like a sheet of glass reflecting the sun, and for a moment, I thought everything had fallen perfectly into place. My wife was carrying boxes, balancing one on her hip while holding another in her hands, and I was setting up a couple of old rocking chairs on the porch. We had imagined this scene for months, dreamed of a place away from the chaos of the city, where mornings would begin with birdsong and evenings would end with the glow of the sunset across the water. But that dream shattered almost instantly when the unmistakable sound of a sharp, screeching voice cut through the calm like a knife. "Excuse me. What exactly do you think you're doing?" The voice carried the authority of someone who had spent years bullying people into silence. I turned and there she was, our new neighbor, the one everyone in the area warned us about before we even signed the paperwork. She had the stereotypical HOA Karen look, short, over-bleached hair, oversized sunglasses covering half her face, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a badge of law. Her other hand clutched a phone, and even from a distance, I could see her nails painted bright red as she jabbed a finger toward us. My wife paused mid-step, arms still loaded with boxes, and blinked. We're moving in," she said, her voice polite but puzzled. That was not the answer Karen wanted. She stomped closer, her wedge heels clicking loudly on the pavement as if each step was meant to assert dominance. "Not without approval, you're not. This community has rules. Rules you clearly know nothing about. For one, moving trucks aren't allowed past 5 o'clock, and two, no one moves in without my clearance." I actually laughed under my breath, thinking she had to be joking, but her glare told me she wasn't. "From you? Lady, we don't need clearance from you. This is my property, and the deed is in my name. We're not asking permission to live in our own home." She gasped like I had insulted royalty. "That's not how this works. I'm on the HOA board. I am the board, practically. You cannot just waltz in here, dump your boxes around, and act like you're free to do whatever you please. There are protocols. There are forms. There are approvals." My wife just rolled her eyes, shifted the boxes higher in her arms, and walked inside the house without another word. That silence enraged Karen more than anything. She turned back to me, her face blotchy red, her hand waving the phone like it was a weapon. "You'll regret this. I'll call the cops right now. In fact, I'm already dialing. You want to break rules? Let's see how the sheriff feels about trespassing, noise violations, and disturbing the peace." Her voice rose louder and louder until it echoed across the whole street. Some neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, and a couple even stood on their lawns, watching like it was their evening entertainment. I could feel my stomach nodding a little. I wasn't worried about being guilty, we had done absolutely nothing wrong, but I also knew how unpredictable situations could get once the police were involved. I stayed calm and leaned against the porch railing, trying not to let Karen's shrill voice ruin our day. My wife came back outside, still carrying more boxes, and she whispered to me, "Ignore her. She'll run out of energy eventually." But Karen didn't run out of energy. She paced back and forth at the edge of our driveway, gesturing dramatically while speaking into her phone. "Yes, officer, they're right here. They're refusing to leave. They're threatening me. You need to come immediately." She paused, pretending to look terrified. "Yes, I fear for my safety." My jaw clenched. She was lying straight through her teeth, and she knew exactly what she was doing. A few minutes later, the distant wail of sirens broke through the evening air. Red and blue lights flashed down the road as two sheriff's SUVs pulled into our quiet street. Karen threw her arms into the air like she had been waiting for her rescue all along. Finally, she cried, rushing toward them as if they were her personal security detail. "Officers, over here. It's them. That man and woman over there, they're trespassing, ignoring HOA laws, and causing chaos. I want them removed immediately." Both deputies stepped out of their vehicles, looking around with serious expressions. I took a deep breath, ready to explain myself calmly. But before I could even say a word, something unexpected happened. One of the deputies' eyes locked onto my wife, who was just then setting down another box on the porch. His expression shifted instantly. His stiff posture relaxed, and then he did something that completely changed the energy in the entire situation. He stood tall, raised his hand to his forehead, and delivered a sharp, respectful salute. My wife, without hesitation, returned the salute with the same crisp precision. The crowd of neighbors that had gathered gasped quietly. Karen froze mid-rant, her mouth hanging open, her finger still pointing in our direction. What? Why are you saluting her?" she stammered. "She's just some random woman moving boxes. She's breaking the rules." The second deputy smirked, and his eyes glinted with amusement as he looked directly at Karen. "Ma'am, that random woman is someone who outranks just about everyone here." Karen's face drained of color. She looked back at my wife, suddenly confused, suddenly unsure of the ground she had been so confident standing on. She tried again, her voice breaking, "I don't care who she is. This is my neighborhood. I make the rules. And if you won't arrest them, I'll make sure the HOA sues them into next week." But for the first time since she appeared in our driveway, her voice didn't carry the same power. The deputies weren't even looking at her anymore. They were looking at my wife with nothing but respect. And Karen, who had stormed onto our property certain she was untouchable, had no idea that the person she had picked a fight with was the last person in the county she should have messed with. Karen stood frozen, her arms still stretched out accusingly, but the energy had shifted completely. The deputies were no longer here for her performance, they were focused on my wife. The first deputy dropped his salute only after she acknowledged him, his voice carrying the kind of respect you didn't fake. "Ma'am," he said, almost relieved, "didn't expect to see you here." My wife gave a small nod, calm and composed, as if this sort of scene was something she'd lived through countless times. What Karen couldn't possibly have known was that my wife had spent nearly 2 decades serving her country, decorated multiple times for her leadership overseas, and after retiring, she had taken a position with the sheriff's department as a tactical advisor. Around here, her name carried weight, and not because she sought attention, but because she earned every ounce of respect with discipline, courage, and integrity. And that salute wasn't just a formality, it was recognition. Karen sputtered, trying to find her voice. "I don't understand. Why are you treating her like some kind of general? She's breaking HOA rules. She had a moving truck here after hours. She didn't get landscaping approval. She didn't even submit a color swatch for the shutters." She was practically shaking with rage, her words tumbling out in a spiral of nonsense. The deputies exchanged glances, both suppressing smiles at her desperation. Finally, the second deputy crossed his arms and said flatly, "Ma'am, moving into your own home isn't a crime. Carrying boxes isn't illegal. Nothing you've described here even comes close to an arrest." Karen's face twisted as she jabbed her finger toward us again. "But she disrespected me. I'm on the HOA board. You have to enforce the rules, otherwise what's the point of having order in this community?" My wife stepped forward slowly, setting her box down on the porch with deliberate care. Her voice was low, steady, and commanding, the kind of tone that silenced a room before you realized you'd gone quiet. "Karen," she said firmly, "I've dealt with insurgents who were easier to reason with than you. I didn't come here to fight. I came here to live peacefully. But if you think you can fabricate charges, threaten us with your authority, and use the police as your personal enforcers, you are gravely mistaken." Karen blinked, her confidence faltering under the weight of that steady gaze. My wife wasn't shouting, wasn't gesturing wildly, but every word she spoke cut sharper than Karen's screeches. "You called the sheriff's department under false pretenses," she continued. "You lied about trespassing. You lied about threats. And that's a crime. If I file harassment charges against you, I'll have every right to see this through in court. Do I make myself clear?" The silence that followed was heavy. Even the neighbors, who had been peeking from behind curtains or watching with folded arms from their lawns, stopped whispering. All eyes were on Karen, and for the first time, she looked like she didn't know what to do. Her bravado cracked, and she stammered, You can't talk to me like that. I'm the HOA board president. I can fine you. I can have you removed." "No, you can't," the first deputy interrupted, his voice sharp now. "What you can't do, ma'am, is misuse emergency services for your personal grievances. If I get another call like this from you, don't be surprised if you're the one facing charges." Karen's jaw dropped open. She turned toward the deputies like they had betrayed her. "You're supposed to be on my side," she cried. "I'm protecting the neighborhood from people like them." But her shrill protest only drew more stares from the neighbors, some shaking their heads, others quietly smiling as if they had been waiting for someone to finally stand up to her. One woman across the street whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "About time someone put Karen in her place." My wife didn't gloat, didn't raise her voice, didn't even smirk. She simply picked up the box she had set down earlier and walked back into the house like the matter was already over. I leaned against the porch rail, folding my arms, and met Karen's frantic eyes. "This isn't your kingdom," I said calmly. "You don't make the laws here. And you sure don't control us." The deputies gave us a nod, then turned back toward their vehicles. One of them looked directly at Karen before leaving and added, "Ma'am, consider this your warning. Next time, you'll be the one riding in the back of the car." With that, they drove away, leaving Karen standing in our driveway with nothing but her clipboard and her humiliation. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen in disbelief, her face pale, her lips pressed tightly together as if she was chewing on her own frustration. She had expected sirens and arrests, maybe even the sight of us being dragged away in handcuffs. Instead, the very people she thought she could weaponize against us had saluted my wife and left her looking powerless. The neighbors slowly began to disperse, shaking their heads as they walked back inside their homes. Some waved at us, offering quick smiles that said more than words ever could. They had seen the whole thing. They knew what had just happened. Karen, on the other hand, finally found her voice again, though it was weaker now, trembling with anger she couldn't quite control. "This isn't over," she hissed, her sunglasses slipping down her nose as she jabbed a finger at me one last time. "You'll regret moving here. I'll make sure of it." But her threat lacked its earlier bite. She turned on her heel and stormed down the sidewalk, her wedges clacking against the pavement, her shoulders hunched like someone carrying the weight of unexpected defeat. I watched her go, then looked back at the house. My wife had set the last box on the counter and was calmly unpacking, as if none of this had fazed her in the slightest. That was her gift, she didn't let petty drama shake her. She had seen far worse and faced far greater challenges than a neighborhood busybody with a clipboard. But as I closed the door behind me, I knew one thing for certain: Karen wasn't finished. People like her never quit after the first confrontation. She had been embarrassed, her power challenged in front of the entire neighborhood, and people like Karen only doubled down when they felt cornered. This was just the opening move in what I could already tell was going to be a long, drawn-out battle. And while I admired my wife's calm, I couldn't help but feel a surge of determination rise within me. If Karen thought we were going to roll over and let her dictate our lives, she had picked the wrong family to mess with. The first battle was over, and Karen had lost. But I could already see the storm she was planning next. The next morning I woke up early, expecting a fresh start after the chaos of the previous evening. I thought maybe Karen had embarrassed herself enough to retreat for a while, maybe she'd avoid us like the plague from now on. But the moment I opened the front door to grab the morning paper, the illusion of peace shattered. There, taped to the door in neon orange paper, was an HOA violation notice, screaming in bold letters. I pulled it down and scanned through the list, and each line made my eyebrows climb higher. According to the notice, we had committed multiple offenses in less than 24 hours of living here. The first so-called violation was unauthorized moving truck after approved hours. The second claimed failure to submit landscaping plans prior to occupancy. The third said unapproved exterior paint color, which was hilarious because the cabin hadn't been painted in years. It was natural wood siding, exactly as it had been when we bought it. But the fourth violation took the cake: disrespect toward HOA board members. That was a new one. I chuckled to myself as I read it out loud, and my wife, who had just stepped into the kitchen with a cup of coffee, smirked and shook her head. So now it's a finable offense to hurt her feelings? She's more fragile than I thought, she said. I turned the page over and nearly dropped it. Attached was a bill demanding $2,750 in fines, with a warning that if we failed to pay within 10 days, the HOA would begin foreclosure proceedings against our property. My laughter died instantly. This wasn't just some petty power trip anymore, this was a direct threat. I handed the paper to my wife, who read it calmly, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't even look surprised. She simply folded the notice in half and set it neatly on the counter. She's overreaching, she said. And overreaching people are easy to deal with if you know how. That calm tone was something I had seen countless times during her years in the military. It meant she was already formulating a plan, already putting the pieces together to dismantle the problem at its root. What do we do? I asked, still feeling the heat rise in my chest. We build a case, she replied. She thinks intimidation works, but intimidation only lasts as long as the target is unprepared. We're not unprepared. She pulled out a binder and started sliding the violation notices into clear plastic sleeves. Every single thing she sends us goes in here. Every call, every email, every interaction, documented. The louder she screams, the bigger the file gets. I admired her composure, but part of me wanted to march straight to Karen's house and shove the notice back in her face. Instead, I took her advice and followed her lead. While she organized, I drove to the county office downtown and requested a copy of our property deed. The clerk, a friendly man in his 60s, glanced at the address and smiled knowingly. "Ah, that property," he said. "You're lucky. That land was bought before the HOA was even formed. It's grandfathered in. Their rules don't apply to you at all." My heart leapt. So they can't fine us? They can't enforce any of this? He shook his head. Legally, they can't touch you. But that doesn't stop them from trying to scare people into compliance. Happens more often than you'd think. I left the office with certified copies of the deed and a sense of relief. Karen's entire campaign of threats was built on a house of cards, and my wife and I now had the gust of wind ready to blow it all down. When I got home and showed her the documents, she smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but a quiet, satisfied one, the kind a chess player gives when they know the game is already won even if the opponent hasn't realized it yet. "Perfect," she said, slipping the deed into the binder next to the violation notice. "Now all we need is a stage." The opportunity came faster than expected. A notice was posted on the community bulletin board announcing the monthly HOA meeting. According to the flyer, serious violations of community standards would be addressed, and all residents were encouraged to attend. My wife and I exchanged a glance. We both knew what that meant. Karen wasn't going to let her humiliation from the sheriff's deputies stand. She was doubling down, preparing to make an example of us in front of the entire neighborhood. "She wants a stage," my wife said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "We'll give her one." The days leading up to the meeting were tense. Every morning, I checked the front door and found new violation notices plastered there. One claimed we hadn't mowed the lawn properly, despite the fact that it was winter and the grass hadn't grown in weeks. Another said we had an unauthorized vehicle in the driveway, our perfectly registered family SUV. She even left one accusing us of having improper curtain colors visible from the street. It was beyond ridiculous. But every slip of paper went into the binder, every baseless accusation carefully preserved. Meanwhile, whispers spread through the neighborhood. Some neighbors avoided us, clearly not wanting to get caught in the crossfire, while others quietly stopped by to share their own stories about Karen's harassment. An older man who lived 2 houses down told me she once tried to fine him for having a bird feeder. A young couple across the street admitted she'd called animal control on them 3 times because their dog barked when the mailman arrived. Everyone had a Karen story, and they were all tired of her, but most had been too afraid to challenge her. That fear was exactly how she held power. My wife wasn't afraid, though. She had faced far worse than a suburban tyrant with a clipboard. And as the day of the HOA meeting approached, she prepared like it was a mission briefing. She rehearsed her points, organized the documents in precise order, and even typed up a summary letter that outlined every violation Karen had attempted to pin on us, followed by the legal proof that none of it applied. By the time the meeting night arrived, we were ready. The community clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs filled every corner, and neighbors leaned against the walls, whispering to one another. At the front of the room sat the HOA board, and at the center of the table, like a queen ready to pass judgment, sat Karen. She wore a smug smile, her sunglasses perched on her head, and in front of her was a thick stack of papers that I assumed were all the fabricated violations she planned to throw at us. As soon as we walked in, her smile widened. She thought she had won already. She thought tonight was the night she'd crush us publicly, parade us as an example of what happens when you defy her. But what she didn't know was that we had come prepared with more than just defenses, we had come with the truth, and the truth was about to shatter her illusion of control in front of everyone. The night of the HOA meeting felt electric, like the air before a storm. My wife and I walked into the community clubhouse together, side by side, while every pair of eyes turned toward us. The room was already buzzing with whispers, neighbors leaning toward each other, some clearly eager for drama, others curious to see if the rumors about last week's showdown with the sheriff were true. At the front of the room, sitting behind a long folding table with a gavel in front of her like she was running a courtroom, was Karen. Her smug smile spread wide the moment she saw us, the kind of grin a cat gives before it pounces on its prey. She shuffled her stack of papers dramatically, as though preparing to bury us under their weight. I could feel the tension in the room rising, but my wife was calm, her stride steady, her expression unreadable. She wasn't just walking into a meeting, she was walking into a battlefield, and she knew exactly how to handle herself. We took our seats in the middle row, where everyone could see us. Karen tapped the gavel against the table, silencing the crowd. "This meeting is called to order," she announced with false authority. "Tonight we address the most serious violations this community has seen in years. These new residents have ignored our rules, defied our authority, and disrespected the HOA board. It is my recommendation that we begin foreclosure proceedings immediately unless they pay their fines in full." A collective murmur ran through the crowd. Some neighbors frowned, others looked uneasy. Everyone seemed to be waiting for our response. Karen wasted no time. She stood up and began reading off the violations one by one in a voice dripping with satisfaction. Unauthorized moving truck, failure to submit landscaping plans, unapproved exterior paint, improper vehicle registration, disrespect toward board members. Her list went on, each accusation more absurd than the last, until it was clear she was less concerned with truth and more interested in humiliation. Finally, she slapped the stack of papers onto the table with a dramatic flourish. "The evidence speaks for itself. These people are not fit to be part of our community. I move for a vote to begin foreclosure." The silence that followed was thick. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some nodding hesitantly, others looking at us with pity. Karen was about to call for the vote when my wife stood up. She didn't raise her voice, didn't slam her papers down, didn't match Karen's theatrics. She simply walked to the front of the room, set a neat binder on the table, and looked directly at the crowd. "Everything you just heard," she began, her tone calm and steady, "is false. And I can prove it." She opened the binder and began pulling out documents one by one. First, the violation notices Karen had taped to our door, each carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. "Here are the so-called violations we received," she said, holding them up for the crowd to see. "Not one of these references a legitimate legal statute. They are arbitrary rules invented by this board." Then she pulled out the certified deed from the county office. "And here is the legal property deed, recorded before this HOA even existed. This land is exempt from HOA jurisdiction. Their rules don't apply here. Every violation notice, every fine, every threat, invalid." The room erupted in murmurs again, louder this time. Karen's smug smile faltered, but she quickly tried to recover. "That doesn't matter. This community has standards. We can't just let people do whatever they want." My wife's eyes narrowed slightly. She pulled out the next document, a signed letter from the sheriff himself. "It does matter," she said firmly. "This letter, from the sheriff, confirms that the harassment and false reports filed against us were unfounded. If it happens again, charges will be filed. That's not a threat, it's the law." The room went silent again, but this time the silence carried weight. You could feel the shift. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide, finally seeing the full picture. And then, as if on cue, the door to the clubhouse opened and in walked the sheriff himself. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned. He wasn't in uniform this time, but his presence carried the same authority. He walked calmly to the back of the room, nodded to my wife, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Everything she just said checks out. The property is outside HOA jurisdiction. These violations have no legal standing." Karen's face went pale. Her grip on her stack of papers tightened, her knuckles turning white. But you can't just dismiss the rules," she stammered, her voice rising in desperation. "If we don't enforce them, there will be chaos. People will paint their houses neon colors. They'll plant weeds. They'll bring down property values." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe they'll just live their lives without being harassed. This community isn't your personal fiefdom, Karen." The room broke into applause, starting small but quickly growing louder. Some neighbors stood, clapping enthusiastically, while others muttered things like, "Finally," and, "About time someone stopped her." Karen looked around wildly, her authority crumbling before her eyes. For years she had controlled this neighborhood with fear and intimidation, but now the very people she lorded over were siding against her. My wife closed her binder and spoke one last time. "We moved here to live in peace, not to play power games. We respect our neighbors, we respect the community, but we will not be bullied. If the HOA continues this harassment, we will pursue legal action. And I assure you, we will win." Her words landed like a hammer. Karen opened her mouth to reply, but no sound came out. Her lips trembled, her face flushed bright red, and for the first time since we met her, she was silent. The meeting adjourned shortly after. No vote was taken, no foreclosure threatened. Neighbors came up to us afterward, shaking hands, offering apologies for not standing up to Karen sooner, and welcoming us properly to the community. The sheriff gave my wife another respectful nod before leaving, and that simple gesture said everything. It wasn't just about rank or titles, it was about the respect she had earned. As we walked out into the cool night air, I looked at my wife and smiled. "You know," I said, "I think Karen's finally learned she picked the wrong fight." My wife smirked faintly, her eyes softening. "Bullies never really learn," she said. "But they do fall quiet when enough people stop letting them talk." And she was right. From that day on, Karen never spoke to us again. She avoided us completely, her clipboard clutched tighter than ever, but her voice gone. The neighborhood slowly relaxed, neighbors becoming friendlier now that the shadow of her control had been broken. And as for us, we finally had the peace we came here for. The cabin by the lake became exactly what we dreamed it would be, a sanctuary, a place of calm, untouched by the noise of people like Karen. And every time I sat on the porch, watching the sunset reflect on the water, I remembered the look on her face when the sheriff saluted my wife, and the silence that followed.